Hey folks, I'm Hemant Krishna and I'm an open source developer who also happens to contribute to LitmusChaos. Today in this video, I'll be demonstrating how we can add OAuth to ChaosCenter. In simple terms, we'll be seeing how can we add Google and GitHub login to ChaosCenter. In this video, we'll be learning how the whole authorization system of ChaosCenter works, and I'll also be giving a quick walkthrough or a demonstration of how you can enable this in your Litmus Chaos hosting. So before we get started, while shooting this video, the latest version of Litmus release is version 2.5.0. You might want to keep that in mind. Let's get right into it. So how does this whole OAuth system work within Chaos Center? So Chaos Center has three major components involved in this whole OAuth system. So one is the front-end client, of course, which we interact with. One is the authentication server, which is part of the Litmus server deployment. And the third component is the DEX server, which we will be additionally deploying in the demonstration. All right. So just a quick walkthrough of how or theory of how this whole system works. So once the DEX server is deployed and configured, your front-end client sends a request to the authentication server saying that, hey, the user wants to do a Google or a GitHub login. The auth server detects this and forwards the request to the DEX server. The DEX server completely handles each and every OAuth to specifications with GitHub or Google and gives the authentication server back with the user data like the name and email ID. The auth server takes this data, puts it into the database, and generates a JWT token of this, which it sends back to the front-end client, and voila, you're logged in, right? So the front-end client goes to the auth server, which goes to the DEX server, and in this case goes to GitHub. You get back the data, and the auth server takes it back, and you get a JWT in your front-end client. One other good thing to note that the DEX server deployment is completely optional. So if you're self-hosting Litmus yourself, this is an optional thing you do not need to do if you want to just have the traditional old username and password based login, right? So a few resources before we get right onto the demonstration that we'll be using is the Litmus documentation and the GitHub repository. So you can see that we have the Litmus docs opened up. So in this here, you can just click on get started and you can learn more about how to self-host LitmusChaos and all the good stuff. And if you specifically want a written guide on this demonstration, you can click on user guides, advanced installation, Chaos Center, and you will find a page named Chaos Center with OAuth to login support that you will have a written guide of how to deploy OAuth in your Chaos Center. So we'll be demonstrating the same. And the second resource is, of course, the Litmus code base. You can find all the codes. We'll be taking the deployment files out of this repository. So if you go to the Litmus portal folder, you'll find a folder named Dex Server, which contains all the YAML repositories, all the YAML manifest that you can deploy in your Kubernetes server. So, and as I mentioned, we'll also be using Dex, which is an Open ID Connect provider, also known as an OIDC provider. So this is a cloud native tool that Litmus utilizes. And an advantages of this tool is today we are supporting Google and GitHub login. Tomorrow, if you want to add some complex mechanism like SAML or LDAP, you can just simply add it to your Chaos Center with just configurational changes. So uh, before we start with the demo, there are a few prerequisites. Of course, you need to have Kubernetes 1.17 liter, a persistent volume of 20 gigs or above, kubectl, and a deployed Chaos Center, and at least one of the following. Either you need to have Google OAuth credentials and GitHub OAuth credentials. I'll also show a quick demo of how to generate these while we go with the walkthrough. So let's get started. So for this demo, I'll be using AKS, the Azure Kubernetes service, and I have already created my Kubernetes cluster and configured my kubectl to communicate with AKS. So just few configurations or for people who are following in AKS, although this is platform agnostic, you can do the same in any cloud platform, or even if you are running on Minikube, that's completely fine. So one good cool thing, like if people who are following on Azure, you want to do is go to the networking tab and ensure that HTTP application routing is enabled. What this essentially does, it creates an ingress for us with which we can expose Kubernetes apps to internet. So if I go to like services and ingress, I can see there's an exposed port and external IP with which I can deploy an ingress with an annotation that will expose my Litmus front end to the internet. So let's get started with the code. So I'll just create a folder Litmus and oops, I already have a folder. So you can see the folder is empty. So we'll quickly git clone our Litmus repository. So we'll go quickly grab the link and git clone the repo. So we'll wait until the repo is cloned and so yeah, now we have the repo clone. So we are into the master and we need to cd into the Litmus portal folder where we can find all the Litmus portal related code and configurations. To just show you that my Kubernetes cluster is up, if I do kubectl get node, uh, I'm gonna get like a node which is ready, and of course it's a single node cluster. So, and if I just check before applying or deploying my ChaosCenter, if I have anything in the Litmus namespace, I shouldn't ideally get none. So if I do kubectl get PO in Litmus namespace, as you can see, there is no resources in the Litmus namespace. So I don't have any ChaosCenter deployed right now, which was one of the prerequisite. So we'll quickly deploy the ChaosCenter namespace. And before we do that, I always like to split my terminal into dashboard where I can always see what is there in the namespace, what processes are running, or what services are running, or what deployments are running in my Kubernetes cluster. So I'm gonna simply people use tmux here. I use item, so it's gonna be a very similar experience. So I'm gonna split my terminal into three parts, as you can see. And on the top above part here, I'm gonna watch every 1 second kubectl get pods in Litmus. So what it's essentially gonna do is it's gonna query kubectl get pods in Litmus namespace every second, and it'll just stay there. So it becomes easier for me if there's a new deployment. And I'm gonna do something very similar. Watch every second kubectl get services and Litmus namespace. So because we don't have anything deployed in Litmus namespace right now, it's empty. But you'll start seeing stuff when we deploy it in the namespace. So let's quickly deploy our ChaosCenter, and in order to do that, we already have a file named cluster k8 manifest, which deploys a sample ChaosCenter right out of the box. So let's do kubectl apply f cluster k8 manifest. Yeah. So once we do this, it's gonna create a bunch of configurations, and as you can see, uh, pods are getting created and services are getting created too. So once they are being created, so yeah, there is some probably like a Docker rate limiter issue. That's why you're getting a crash load back off. But if you let it for a while, yeah, it's running. So we'll wait for the Mongo container to create so that our ChaosCenter is up and running. Until then, let's configure an ingress so that we can expose our ChaosCenter to internet. So if you see in the Litmus portal folder, you will have a file named ingress.yml, which is a simple YAML file that basically is nothing but an ingress deployment. But I'm going to create a new ingress file and let's call it an ingress.yaml. So in this ingress file, I'm just basically going to do a very quick hack so that I can explain it one by one and not waste time. So you can see I've pasted few stuff, and let's go what's really happening over here. So as I mentioned, this specific line, right? HTTP application routing, this annotation needs to be there so that the Azure Kubernetes service can expose this specific services to the internet. So we are of course need to deploy it in the Litmus namespace, and we are having a host. So what is this host? This host is nothing but the same this DNS resolver is the one that Azure gives you. So if I go back to my Azure properties of my Kubernetes cluster properties, you will see that the DNS is being listed. So this is the same DNS which I have copied. So yeah, so there is Litmus with an A record, which exposes the front-end service as well as the back-end service. And we need to have a separate host. This is very important. We need to have a separate host, which is the DEX host, which will expose the DEX service. Now, you might be asking something. If you see my services, I see there are only three services: the Litmus portal front-end service, the server service, and the Mongo service. And here I've also mentioned the DEX service, but we haven't deployed the DEX service yet, which we'll get there too. So I'll quickly save. The file, and once I save the file, let me apply this ingress onto my Kubernetes cluster. So if I go kubectl force apply, and I apply my n ingress file. Oh, oops, I made a typo over there. It should be kubectl apply and force, not kubectl force and apply. So it'll say my ingress is being created, and if I do a quick kubectl describe ingress in Litmus namespace, it'll basically tell me that it'll tell me the status of my ingress, and as you can see, it also throws an error that Litmus portal DEX service is not found. So let's deploy our DEX server. So as I mentioned earlier, let's cd into the DEX server folder, and you will find a DEX deployment file. So in this file, we need to do some configurations over here. As you can see, there are to-dos placed. So let's quickly configure. So first, you need to configure the issue URL. So if you remember what this issue URL was, issuer URL was, when we did, when we were creating our ingress, we specified a host for our DEX deployment, right? Oops. Let me quickly we specified the specific host, so we'll be copying this host, and this will be our configurer URL. So let's go back to DEX server, DEX deployment, and let's basically replace this domain with the host that we just created. All right, and let's come down, and because we also have our front end running in a host, we are gonna say HTTP, and we are gonna basically copy the Litmus or DNS. That's basically this. We're gonna add auth dex callback. So this is nothing but the authentication server's callback. When it gets, as I mentioned earlier, when it gets data from DEX, the auth server needs to know where to send the GWT, right? So this is nothing but that URL, that specific URL. So we have done this. Now only things to configure that is left are, of course, the client IDs and the redirect URIs. The redirect URIs, I'll address them first. They are nothing but the same configure issuer URL basically. So we'll replace these with the issuer URL and add a slash callback at the end. And we're gonna do a similar thing in the GitHub one too. So we are gonna add slash callback, and that's it. We are done. So the only things that we need to add is the Google and GitHub client IDs and client secrets. So let me quickly show you how to generate these. It should be a very quick process. So let's go onto a browser. So first we'll generate the GitHub one because it's fairly easy. And make sure to copy this redirect URI that you just created, right? So keep this in your clipboard. Go to github.com, your profile. Of course, go to your profile and go to settings. Go to, you should find something known as developer settings. Go to OAuth apps, create a new OAuth app, and let's just call it ChaosCenter implementation. And you can just give a random URL. I'm gonna give my domain as a URL, but it could be random. You don't need. And for callback, you make sure to paste the same redirect URI that you configured in your DEX configuration. And once you create registered applications, you'll get a client ID. Copy this client ID, go back to your DEX configuration, go to GitHub, and basically replace this client ID over here. So you will be essentially giving your client ID over here, and now we need client secret. So this is of course a secretive thing. So go back again. You'll see an option generate a new client secret. So generate a new client secret. I have 2FA enabled, hence such authorization and authentication process. You might get it easy. So you can see I've generated a key. I go and I paste my key. So I know the key is public right now, but that's okay because I'll be deleting the apps after the demonstration. So we have created the GitHub ones. Let's go create the Google ones. So for Google one, you need to go to GCP. You need to have a GCP account, right? So you need to go to GCP. You need to go to your console. You need to have a project enabled. And once you go to your GCP dashboard, you can go to API services. Once you click on API services, just wait for a while, give it a second. Go to credentials. We go to credentials and we click on create credential, and we need to click on OAuth client ID. So once we do this, it's going to load, and we are going to call it a web application, and we are again going to call it ChaosCenter implementation. So in redirect URIs, add a URI and make sure to paste the redirect URI that you had given in your DEX configuration. So Control C, Control V, and create. And just give it a while. It will say OAuth client created, and you have your client ID and client secret displayed. So these are basically secrets. So if you're going to deploy with some kind of automation, essentially you want it to be a Kubernetes secret. So ensure they are Kubernetes secret if you are deploying. For demonstration purposes, I'm going to keep it public. And for your client secret, again, go copy your client secret and paste them. So we are done. We are basically done with our DEX configurations. We have nothing much to configure. So close this. And what you essentially need to do is uh, apply the YAML file, right? So you do kubectl apply f DEX deployment YAML. It's going to create a bunch of stuff. And you can see finally we have the DEX server deployment up and running. And we also have the DEX service up and running. All right. And let us check to ensure. Let us check if our ingress can still detect our DEX service that we just created. If not, we'll have to delete and apply the ingress. So you can simply use the same command, kubectl describe ingress in Litmus namespace, and let it load. And you can see now we have application running, the error is gone. So ingress can technically uh, can technically identify the DEX servers. We have one more final step before we enable DEX. So that before going to that particular step, let me go to the ChaosCenter and show it to you. So if I go back to my Kubernetes cluster domain, and if I click on services and ingress, and if I click on ingress, let it load. There are two hosts. One is the Litmus one. If I click it, you can see my Litmus ChaosCenter is deployed. And in order to enable or access, what do you call? In order to access OAuth, I need to go to /auth/dex/login. So if you do not have DEX enabled, you generally get this error message. Or if there is anything wrong with your DEX configuration, you get this error message. So we are one last step away from configuring DEX, and that is to enable to tell the authentication server to enable DEX. So basically, if you go back to the architecture, I told you that the DEX server is an optional deployment. So the auth server does not know that the DEX server is present. So we need to tell the auth server that the DEX server is available, and you need to enable DEX capabilities. And how do we do that? We do that using environment variables. So if you go to the documentation over here, I have very well mentioned what are these environment variables and what do these do and how we can set them dynamically. So I'm going to use a simple hack. I've already copied the environment variables, and I will of course explain of what is going to happen. So Basically, there are three variables. That is the DEX enabled, which is true. This thing needs to be true for the auth server to know that the DEX server is enabled. We need to have the OIDC issuer, which is nothing but the exposed URL of your DEX deployment. That is also nothing but the issuer URL that we gave in our DEX configuration. We need to have DEX OAuth callback URL, which is nothing but the exposed URL of the front-end service with /auth/dex/callback appended to it. So once we hit enter, it's going to say deployment apps, and you can see a pod is being created and another pod is being terminated. Both are Litmus portal servers. So new pod with the updated environment variables are being created. To check if our environment variables have been successfully applied, we do kubectl describe deployment Litmus portal server in Litmus namespace and the auth server, because the Litmus portal server deployment also has the GraphQL server, so we need to specify the auth server. So once we do that, we can see that the environment variables that we applied have been successfully applied. And that's pretty much it. We have configured Dex. Now let's go and check if it works. So if I go back to my Kubernetes cluster again, we have the Litmus host. We come back to a ChaosCenter, and to access Dex or OAuth login, you just do auth/dex/login. And once you do that, uh, so what pretty much failed is ensure that you have trailing slashes. So apparently I did not have a trailing slash in my Dex configuration, but I did over here. So we are going to simply remove this trailing slash and hit enter and create a new deployment. So you can see the deployment is being terminated and it has been created. So I can see you will get a message that, authorization server encountered. In this case, you can go to the auth server logs and you'll know what exactly has gone wrong. So you can see the new pod has been created, and just let's check uh, if it has the right configurations or the right environment variables. And as you can see, it does not have the trailing slash, which is nice. So if I go hit reload again, and voila, I'm into Dex. So I'll quickly do git auth, and you can see ChaosCenter implementation. I'll give authorize, I'll be redirected and give it a while, and it'll ask me for a new password. So I'm just gonna use whatever Apple suggests. I'm going to change my password. You can feel free not to, but it's safer if you do. And voila, I am into my ChaosCenter. And if I want to log out, I'll just quickly show how Google OAuth works. So for that, I'll use Brave browser because I have logged in to Google via my Brave. I'm gonna go to auth/dex/login. Oops, I think I made a typo there. And once we do, you'll get logged in with Google. And I think I'm already logged in with Google, so it won't ask me. And voila, I'm in. So we have successfully integrated Dex or with Litmus or ChaosCenter, and we are successfully able to deploy it. And that's pretty much it. Uh, so thanks for watching. I'm Hemant Krishna. You can connect me with at these socials, and you can also join us on Slack. So we have a Slack channel. We also have community meetings of which is on third Wednesday of every month at the moment. So feel free to join in if you have any question and answers regarding the same. Thank you. Catch you the next time. Peace.